when they actually finally start interacting with the Egyptians are ruled by the Nubians. But the Nubians have been there all along, but the 25th dynasty, but they're not the only black pharaohs in Egyptian history. They're also not the only black people in Egypt. The ties are deep.
There are some very interesting genetic studies that are starting to emerge that clearly show an African origin of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization. These recent studies, seldom publicized, show without a shadow of a doubt that the ancient Egyptians Kemetu were closely related to modern-day West and Central Africans, and by extension African Americans. In fact, they show that African Americans are more closely related to the ancient Egyptians than the Irish descendants are to the Greeks and the Romans. The picture that is starting to emerge from all these research publications is that Africans were at the root of this latest instance of human civilization. They then spread it to the four corners of the globe. There are a few researchers in the community who are bringing a level of rigor to the field that is helping uncover many of these hidden scientific and historical discoveries. Camgiverse frequently covers emerging scientific data on the subject. Mr.Theory covers lesser-known depictions of Africans in ancient and medieval times. And lastly, King's Monologue specializes in facial reconstructions of key Kemetic figures. Do check out their work. I cannot recommend them enough. Before we begin, a word to the skeptics. I love a good debate, but I can only entertain a debate with those who, number 1, review the evidence provided, and number 2, provide relevant and trustable evidence to support their positions. Also, you will note that the conclusions of the various studies in multiple fields, including genetics, are consistent and provide further support to the multitude of studies previously done in that regard. When you Google ancient Egypt genetic studies, you are overwhelmingly bombarded with the results and interpretation of this study, the Abu Sir el-Malik paper, commissioned by Dr. Hawass. But this study is completely flawed. Here is why. Number 1, it does not deal with ancient Egypt at all, as the period covered was a period in which Kemet had already ended. Number 2, the location of these mummies is at the frontier and not at the core of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization. Number 3, the sample size is dubious at best, or indicative of data manipulation at worst, which would be in line with the whole spirit of the study. In fact, this study and its conclusion are as accurate as saying that Native Americans had European DNA by selecting DNA from New York from 1600 to 1900. The popularity of this study is causing Kemet deniers to say things like these.
Here is scientific proof that ancient Egyptians weren't black. The Afrocentric movement claims that the great pharaohs were actually what they called black or Central Western African, and modern Egyptians are just the invaders. Here is why this is false. A study done in 2017 by 2 German universities examines the DNA of 160 Egyptian mummies. The results were shocking. First of all, they found that the genes of ancient Egyptians resembled Eastern and Mediterranean people. What was even more shocking and ironic, they found that the mummies had 0 sub-Saharan African genes. Modern Egyptians had 15 to 20% African genes. That means that modern Egyptians are actually more black than their ancestors ever were.
As we shall see, not only has she been misled, but her conclusion is, in whole, wrong. I strongly suspect that there is big money paying for this study to show up in any web search about ancient Egypt and genetics, to the point where even ChatGPT cannot give any answers about Egypt origins without quoting this study first. Maybe someday, if I have the time, I'll do some investigative work on this. For now, let us look at actual studies from really trusted sources and methodologies, and what they say about the Nubio-Kemetic civilization and its linkage to Africa. A recent study was done and determined that both Ramses II, also called Ramesses the Great, and Ramses III had the haplogroup E1b1a. The haplogroup E1b1a is of great importance, as it is very prevalent in Black Africa. In fact, Here is a map of the concentration of this haplogroup. When you look at the origins of E1b1a and its dispersal patterns, it shows that it comes from Eastern Africa and then moves to ancient Egypt before coming back down to West and Central Africa. This is an important factor that I want you to remember because it will come back many times throughout this video study. Note that E1b1a is often referred to as M2, so haplogroup E1b1a is the most common haplogroup in Africa. It is also the most common Y-DNA haplogroup for current-day African Americans. That is logical since African Americans predominantly come from Western and Central Africa. One of the most revealing pieces about this paper is that its original aim was in fact to gather more evidence on the harem conspiracy. This was the plot set in motion by the minor wife of Ramem III, Queen Tai, who complotted to kill the king and install her son king. It is in the process of investigating this assassination attempt that research happened to find out that Ramses III and Ramses II both had the Black African haplogroup E1b1a. So you can imagine their surprise when the results showed that Ramses III was indeed Ramses II's son and that they were both Black African. With Zahi Hawass as one of the main author and sponsor, you can understand why the confirmed ethnicity of these two kings hasn't made it to the front page. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that if you saw Ramses II walking down the streets in the US today, you would classify him as an African American. Here are some of the European and Middle Eastern depictions of Ramses II. But how was Ramses II depicted by contemporary artists and artists that he himself, the king, commissioned? Full lips, broad nose, kinky hair, dark brown skin. No other person has that phenotype and can be classified as a Caucasian or an Asiatic. But even more telling is that most African Americans share the E1b1, a haplogroup wink Ramses II. Also, I want you to notice that we are talking about the late period in the Nubio-Kemetic civilization. That means we are talking about the end of the kingdom. Kemet lasted for 3,000 years, and as you get towards the late period, immigration in the delta and invasions increased. But the core of Kemet remained so black that Herodotus himself, in the 5th century BC, described the ancient Egyptians, the Kemetu, as, quote, black skin with woolly hair. And we are just getting started. This study is rarely mentioned by, quote, Egyptologists, end quotes. If it was just these two kings, we would rest our case immediately. But there is another recent study that is also very telling of the makeup of ancient Egypt royalty and their linkages to Africans south of the Sahara, and by extension African Americans. Remember, the most misleading genetic study in ancient Egypt is the study named Ancient Egyptian Mummy Genome suggests increase of sub-Saharan African ancestry in post-Roman periods. It is often referred to as the Abu Sir el-Malik study. It is that study that we discussed earlier in the video. We have discussed how its methodology and its conclusions are not only misleading, but downright in opposition of the truth. There is a follow-up study by Dr. Shamarka Keita and Jean-Philippe Gourdin that not only discuss point by point the fallacies of the Abu Sir study, but present a very interesting genetic analysis of their own. This genetic analysis was performed on multiple royal mummies of the Amarna and Ramesside era. This is the same era that gave us King Tut and the beginnings of monotheism. More videos coming on this, but for now let's take a look at the genetic makeup of these mummies and their cultural affiliations. Note here that EA refers to Eurasians, A refers to Asians, and SSA refers to sub-Saharan Africans. Amenhotep III has a 93.7% genetic affinity with Black Africans. King Tut, the famous boy king, shows a 93.9% genetic affinity with Black Africans. This means by extension that his father and his mum were definitely Black Africans. And do you know who his father is? It is none other than Akhenaten himself. Let's look some more. Ramses III, son to Ramses II, is 93.6% Black African, based on his genetic analysis. So all these Nubio-Kemetic kings are clearly Black African. And just like before, all their depictions match the genetic studies and also match what we already know of Kemet. So then you must be asking yourself, if indeed ancient Egypt Kemet was so black, where did all the black people go? And is there any genetic evidence of their migration? This is exactly what this next study reveals. In March 2023, Dr. Nancy Bird from University College of London showed in her research paper that there was mass migration from ancient Kemet into Central and West Africa. This migration corresponds to the oral history given by the Bamileke people. The numbers on the arrows indicate the sequence of migration as you go back in time. As you can see, the arrival of the Arabs after the 7th century caused the mass migration of population from ancient Kemet towards Western and Central Africa. From there, the population disperses in various directions towards Cameroon, Nigeria, Congo, Ghana, Mauritania, Mali, Sudan. This pattern is also repeated in Morocco and Western Morocco, indicated by the OR number 5, and Tunisia, arrow number 6. What it seems to show is that the arrival of the Arabs caused mass displacement of Africans back into the interior of the continent. These mass migrations had epicenters that culminated into empires that served as melting pots for African gene expansion. Specifically the Kanem-Bornu Empire, the City Senegambia and Mali empires, before the Bantu expansion which lasted until 1750. Seen in this light, the Bantu expansion can really be seen as a return to Africa of ancient African populations that had previously lived in the Sahara, northern Africa, but also in ancient Egypt. But if ancient Egypt was so black for so long, that means the surrounding regions would have also been black from the late Holocene to the Paleolithic and the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, especially in the Sahara. Because if they were anything other than black, then there is no way that Kemet would have stayed black for 3,000 plus years. Well, this next study should shed light on this. In 2018, a team of researchers from the University of Rome in Italy, led by Eugenia Donanasio, found some outstanding facts about the makeup of the Sahara when it was green. Their paper, titled "The Peopling of the Last Green Sahara, Revealed by High-Coverage Resequencing of Trans-Saharan Patrilineages," drew the following conclusion, and I quote, "Our findings suggest that the Green Sahara promoted human movements and demographic expansions, possibly linked to the adoption of pastoralism. Comparing our results with previously reported genome-wide data, we also find evidence for a sex-biased sub-Saharan contribution to Northern Africans, suggesting that historical events mainly contributed to the mtDNA and autosomal gene pool, whereas the Northern African paternal gene pool was mainly shaped by more ancient events." End quote. They go on further to state, and I quote, "In this context, rare Y lineages with a relic geographic distribution can be highly informative regarding human migrations across the Sahara. Thus, considering their frequency distribution, the 4 trans-Saharan lineages, A3M13, EM2, EM78, and RV88, could represent the remains of the Saharan MSY genetic landscape before the desertification, contrary to the usual interpretation involving recent gene flow events. In other words, when the Sahara was green, it allowed for the movement of people and the growth of population across what is now the desert. In fact, we know that in ancient times, there was a river network that crossed the Sahara from west to east. But further to this, their finding shows that the genome at the time was predominantly black African, and that only recent events explain the introduction of what we now call the typical North African. This would explain and support the fact that multiple civilizations previously thought to be black, but present on the continent of Africa, displayed upon further analysis a black ownership and seeding, such as Carthage and the Garamantes. These civilizations, as we have covered in previous videos, only transformed into lighter skin after the Roman invasion in 226 BC and the subsequent Arab invasion in the 8th century AD. But both of these events occur very late and can clearly be delineated via genetic studies. One more thing. There is often criticism and debate amongst Kemet deniers to try and say that the African American black is of a different stock than the builders of the pyramid. We have already proved that statement wrong, but we are again happily adding further data points that validate this. And in this domain, Dr. Nancy Bird has done some amazing work that further solidifies that migration pattern that we have seen before. From southern Africa, or the region of the Great Lakes, to Egypt, and back down to Western and Central Africa. Here, let me cite the study, and I quote, "Previous studies have highlighted how African genomes have been shaped by a complex series of historical events. Despite this, genome-wide data have only been obtained from a small proportion of present-day ethno-linguistic groups. By analyzing new autosomal genetic variation data of 1333 individuals from over 150 ethnic groups from Cameroon, Republic of the Congo, Ghana, Nigeria, and Sudan, we demonstrate a previously underappreciated fine-scale level of genetic structure within these countries, for example, correlating with historical polities in Western Cameroon. By comparing genetic variation patterns among populations, we infer that many northern Cameroonian and Sudanese groups share genetic links with multiple geographically disparate populations, likely resulting from long-distance migrations. In Ghana and Nigeria, we infer signatures of intermixing dated to over 2,000 years ago, corresponding to reports of environmental transformations possibly related to climate change. We also infer recent intermixing signals in multiple African populations, including Congolese, that likely relate to the expansions of Bantu language-speaking peoples." End quote. This means after coming out of Egypt around 1000 AD, a few centuries after the Arab invasion, the black Africans coalesced in large empires, before further dispersing into West and Central Africa. A theory that was first proposed by Dr. Diop, emerging from his linguistic, cultural, and historical studies. A theory that is now validated by DNA studies. Okay then, maybe all these studies aren't true, and maybe Herodotus and all contemporary descriptions of ancient Egyptians being black are wrong. Or maybe their genes were black Africans, but they actually looked Levantine or European. Well, this next study will shed light on this. Dr. Tsuneshiko Hanihara is a Japanese anthropologist who has studied the cranial variation of human populations around the world. He has found that some discrete cranial traits, such as the bipartite zygomatic bone, are more common in infra-Saharan Africans than in other regions. He has also suggested that these traits reflect that the ancient Kemetic population, which was genetically and morphologically distinct from modern North Africans and Eurasians. According to his analysis, the people ancient KMT had a closer affinity to infra-Saharan Africans than to the neighboring populations, and that these commonalities originated from a common ancestral stock in the late Pleistocene. Dr. Hanihara's research provides valuable insights into the biological diversity and history of the African continent, but he is not alone in making these findings. Nancy Lovell. There is now a sufficient body of evidence from modern studies of skeletal remains to indicate that the ancient Egyptians, especially southern Egyptians, exhibited physical characteristics that are within the range of variation for ancient and modern indigenous peoples of the Sahara and tropical Africa. In general, the inhabitants of Upper Egypt and Nubia had the greatest biological affinity to people of the Sahara and more southerly areas. Dr. Nancy Bird said, "There is some evidence from other researchers of climate change altering the environment around 3,000 years ago, reducing forest coverage. That this corresponds with the timings of some ancient migrations we are detecting suggests climate change may be instigating or facilitating these large-scale movements of people." So they had black genetics, of the same lineage as Pan-African black populations today. They were described by their contemporary as black Africans, their depictions by Romans, and Greeks show that they were black Africans of the same stock as African Americans today, and even their cranial remains shows that they were black Africans. To add to this, we have seen how misleading studies have been introduced into the popular lexicon to cause the masses to believe the exact opposite of what truly transpired. But there are more interesting studies and linkages that further validate our point. Schistosomiasis is a parasitic disease caused by blood flukes, trematodes, of the genus Schistosoma, S. It is well documented that Schistosomiasis hematobium was endemic in ancient Egypt. Infection was diagnosed in mummies 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000 years old. And guess which populations today are most affected by and carry Schistosoma hematobium? You guessed it, black African populations. See for yourself. In fact, so much so that it has made it across the Mediterranean and is prevalent in black majority countries in the Americas. We can also see it in the evolution and migration of Schistosome hematobium. African schistosomes have evolved in the region of the African Great Lakes, from where they have been spread along the Nile, red arrow. It is likely that the schistosomes have been dispersed to West Africa in the course of the Yoruba mass migration, orange arrow, and further to Central and South Africa in the course of the Bantu mass migration, yellow arrows. Originated in the Mediterranean region, A. duodenale has been introduced into North India in the course of the Aryan mass migration, blue arrow. Now let's get to the fun part of our study. Let's take 15 kings from ancient Egypt, and let's see what they actually look like. And we will pick from all periods of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization from the start to the end. Let's start with some rulers from the Old Kingdom. Pharaoh Hor-Aha. He immediately followed Narmer, the founder of Kemet. Pharaoh Narmer himself, the first Nebtawi, Lord of the Two Lands, generally recognized as the founder of dynastic Egypt. As you can see, he looks just like a Hausa man. There were many kings before Narmer, and yes, they were all black. Pharaoh Neferefre of the 5th dynasty in 2450 BC. This is just after the pyramids were built. Does he look remotely Levantine or European? It isn't even close. Pharaoh Pepi I, also from the Old Kingdom, but a little later in 2332 BC. Remember, people and researchers of ill repute will come up with all sorts of vague arguments to say the people of the Nubio-Kemetic civilizations were not black Africans. But these depictions of the kings in their own eras are so lively, beautiful, and strikingly black that they would be instant TikTok celebrities today. But alas, Pharaoh Jedefre, 4th dynasty. I mean, see for yourself. Look, you don't even need a DNA test for this guy. Also, if you have some time, check out his pyramid. By the way, we did an extensive video on how the pyramids were really built. You should check it out. And this is Pharaoh Khafre, also from the 4th dynasty. He built the 2nd pyramid of Giza. As you can see, he is unmistakably black. If someone would like to debate that he could be Levantine or European, I would love to hear that argument. Now let's look at pharaohs from the Middle Kingdom. This is Pharaoh Amenemhat III from the 12th dynasty, 1814 BC. Pharaoh Sesostris III, also from the 12th dynasty. The famous King Tut. To the Kemet deniers, please point to just one pharaoh from ancient Egypt that looks white or Levantine in their contemporary depictions. Not depictions made centuries after Kemet, but depictions commissioned by the kings of Nubio-Kemet themselves. If you find one, please show it to me. I have been studying this civilization for decades, and I may have missed that one of the 300+ pharaoh was white or Levantine. So please contact me on Twitter or in the comment section if you find one. The famous Ramses II from the New Kingdom 19th dynasty, 1213 BC, exquisite and unmistakable. See the eyes, the full lips, high cheekbones, subnasal prognathism. I guess that's one nose that survived. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. And finally, Ramses III. It is inconceivable to me that these depictions would even qualify as anything other than Black African. If the ancient Egypt civilization was a Levantine civilization, then we would expect to see significant Levantine genetic signals as we go further back into the early pages of Kemet, and increased Levantine signals as we get towards the epicenter. But this isn't what we see at all. In fact, anthropologist Eric Krubezi undertook extensive genome mapping of a large number of mummies located in the Adaima necropolis. These mummies dated from 4000 to 2600, so a period covering pre-dynastic Kemet and leading up to the pyramids building. Findings from Adaima necropolis. A study from French anthropologist Eric Krubezi at the site of Adaima in Upper Egypt, dating from around 4000 to 2700 BC, revealed significant insights. Analysis of mummies found at this site showed they belonged to the mitochondrial DNA L0F, most commonly found in southern Black African groups like the Sandawe people of Tanzania. The skulls and teeth of these mummies were also similar to those of Black Africans, particularly the Khoisan people. This evidence suggests that the inhabitants of Adaima might represent the indigenous residents of Kemet, part of the founding population of ancient Egyptian civilization. If all of this is not conclusive, then there is one aspect of African phenotype that cannot be faked, confused, or misattributed in any way, and it is that of the hair, and this study shows it elegantly. Struhal's study, conducted in the 1970s, focused on analyzing the hair of pre-dynastic Egyptians. Using a trichometer, he measured the minimum and maximum diameter of the hair shafts. The study found that the hair indices of pre-dynastic Egyptians ranged from 35 to 65. This index is a measure of the cross-sectional diameter of hair strands, which can indicate hair texture. The indices suggested that the hair texture of these ancient Egyptians was very kinky. This finding is significant as it provides insights into their physical characteristics and potentially their genetic ancestry. To put these findings in context, modern human hair averages are between 60 and 110 micrometers, with lower numbers indicating kinkier textures. Sub-Saharan African hair, known for its kinky texture, averages around 60 micrometers, European hair averages around 71 micrometers, and East Asian, including Chinese, hair averages around 83 micrometers. Therefore, the hair texture of the pre-dynastic Egyptians, with indices 60 and below, are unmistakably in the family of sub-Saharan Africans. And with that kinky hair, they engaged into a whole lot of hairstyles. Here is a clip from Mr. Monologue to better describe it.
In his 2008 study, Jeffrey Tazzi acknowledges the importance of Egyptian hair in the portrayal of social and class status, stating, "Hairstyles were used as a means of displaying status. An institutionalized canon for hairstyles was established, coinciding with the creation of administrative institutions. These codified hairstyles continue to serve as the norms for identifying members of the administration or signs of authority." Tassi acknowledges 6 major styles used consistently for ethno-trichological distinction from the pre-dynastic to the Middle Kingdom. These styles are shaved, which is basically bald; cropped, which Africans identify as a shape-up; short round and curly, which is essentially an afro; the tiled style, which is short twists, and the bob, which is slightly longer twists, are found commonly amongst the Afar tribe of Ethiopia. The shoulder-length bob, which is long twists, can be found amongst the Maasai of Kenya. And finally, the tripartite style, which is full-length twists or individual locks of thin to medium size, is a universal African trend. Other styles acknowledged are the globular, the swept-back, the side plait, and the duplex buffant plaited, which are all basically variations of these aforementioned styles. The hairstyles used by the Kemetic infantry and villagers, which you will find in widespread use amongst the Oromo. This hairstyle is essentially a flat-topped afro. So, as you can see, it is patently obvious that all hairstyles seen in ancient Egypt are only achievable naturally with curly African or Afro hair texture, hence the Eurocentric dependence on the unsubstantiated claim of widespread wig use. You will note a total inability to cite any remotely Asian, Eurasian or non-African hairstyles throughout dynastic Egypt. This fact remains a troublesome inconvenience for modern dissenters of the obvious African origin of Nile Valley civilization.
It may in fact be that people have been so bombarded with fake images of Kemet and fabricated narratives of ancient Egypt that they have now incorporated these lies into their reality, foundations of their view on a people who many have come to despise because a book has told them to, a book whose origin they will not question. But just as there is a renaissance happening in Africa, there is also a renaissance happening in the mind of all Afro-descendants. This newfound life passes through the inevitable cataracts of history, one where we liberate the next generation from psychologically damaging historical theft that has caused many in our community to believe that our ancestors did not contribute meaningfully to history. And yet, don't miss our previous episode where we show how Africans created the science of mathematics, along with all its key concepts, and spread it to the four corners of the globe. Also, don't miss our special on Hannibal and the Carthaginians, where we go over all the evidence that shows that Carthage and Hannibal were indeed black.
It's Big V, the prolific producer.
So what excuse do you have this time? You couldn't hit the like and subscribe button because you were driving? Shame on you. It is only through a diligent study of the past that one can perceive the mosaic of the self. Write in the comment which of these research did the trick for you. And stay tuned for part 2.